I grew up with Song Yuhan, and he once promised that he would marry no one but me. But on the day of our wedding, he called out Meng Yuzhu in a hoarse voice. I was framed and pregnant, fell off a cliff. He went mad, searched the mountains for me, and when he found me, he held me tightly in his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. Yuzhu, you're back. You scared me to death. Everyone says Song Yuhan loves me deeply, so much so that he found someone named Meng Yuzhu to be my substitute. But as time passed, Song Yuhan began to truly fall for my substitute. When I was reborn, I ignored his deep feelings, knelt before the emperor, and straightened my back. I'll marry a chicken or a dog, but I won't marry Song Yuhan. Yet, he pushed Meng Yuzhu aside and knelt at my door all night, saying he couldn't live without me. I was still back in my hometown in Lini, raising pigeons, when I heard that Song Yuhan had brought a woman home named Meng Yuzhu. They were inseparable, always together. Song Yuhan treated her like a fragile treasure, fearing she would break. The problem was Meng Yuzhu looked almost exactly like me. People said she was my substitute. I was furious and remembered how he had once sworn to me as a child, "Moxin, I will marry no one but you." I was so angry that I wrote him several letters. The pigeons were the perfect delivery method for my letters, and according to the servants, 3 of them died flying from Lini to Chang'an. My letters sank like stones into the sea. Tao Tao was even angrier than I was. I think Song Yuhan is feeling guilty, so he's too scared to reply. The slap in the face came quickly, Song Yuhan replied. In the letter, he explained in detail that his relationship with Meng Yuzhu wasn't what I thought. As for the details, they were all about their cozy, everyday life together. Was he trying to fool me? I put my plan to return to Chang'an in motion. The letter was sent early this time, and I used a trusted messenger. Even Lu Gonggong from the palace got the news and was already waiting at the city gate, but Song Yuhan wasn't anywhere to be seen. I finally saw him at the palace banquet. He sat down with Meng Yuzhu, who was dressed in a delicate pink gown, and when he saw me, he was surprised. He hurried over to me, excited, and grabbed my hand, saying, "Moxin, how did you return so quickly? I'm so happy." Happy enough to bring another woman to the banquet. I looked at Meng Yuzhu calmly, studying her face that was nearly identical to mine from a distance. She wasn't shy at all. Seeing my gaze, she smiled and curtsied, saying, "I heard you were coming back, and the prince talks about you every day, missing you so much that he forgets to eat or drink." I glanced at Song Yuhan's fair face. This didn't look like someone missing a person. He seemed well-fed and content. Song Yuhan didn't care about my words and smiled at me, saying, "Yuzhu isn't an outsider. You two will surely become good friends." I sneered. Not an outsider? Then is she an insider? Before Song Yuhan could respond, Meng Yuzhu stepped in. "Sister, don't say that. Everyone in the city knows about your marriage to the prince. And once he sets his mind on someone, he never changes. As for me, I'm just someone he brought in to pass the time. It's only because of this face. If I ever gain weight and stop looking like her, he'll kick me out." Song Yuhan immediately grew anxious, looking at her with concern. "What are you talking about? Is this how you see me?" Meng Yuzhu pouted. "Isn't it? Everyone in Chang'an knows I'm just the prince's substitute. Now that the real one is back, will he even spare me a glance? Should I stop embarrassing myself?" Without waiting for an answer, she turned and walked away. Before I could speak, I saw Song Yuhan rush after her, looking frantic. My anger was boiling. He had only been in Chang'an for 3 years, and already my place in his heart seemed so unimportant. I raged in my room, throwing things around, and the maidservants didn't dare approach. Song Yuhan came to see me often, but I always locked him outside. Every time he came, I felt a surge of anger that had nowhere to go, so I replaced the tea set in my room. After a while, my mother couldn't stand it anymore. She stormed into my room, saying, "Moxin, calm down. There might be some misunderstanding here. Song Yuhan is the emperor's younger brother. We can't afford to offend him." I knew that, but I just couldn't swallow my anger. Though the Shun family had the backing of the Empress, it wasn't an asset. It was a restraint. Success or failure would depend on her. My marriage to Song Yuhan wasn't just about childhood love. It also served to strengthen my aunt's position as a noble consort in the palace. Besides, it was common for royals to have multiple wives and concubines, and I didn't mind that much. What I couldn't accept was how quickly Song Yuhan's heart had changed. I remembered when we were children, catching fish and climbing trees together. He had told me clearly that he would marry no one but me. The reality was too much of a shock for me to accept right away. The next day, my mother took me to the palace under the guise of visiting my aunt, but it was really to give me and Song Yuhan a chance to be alone. The thought of him running after Meng Yuzhu without hesitation made my nose sting. I fought back the tears that burned in my eyes, gripping my handkerchief until it left deep marks. Fine. Even if his heart had changed, at least he should feel a little guilty toward me, I thought. I waited by the artificial mountain in the imperial concubine's palace for a long time before I finally saw the hurriedly arriving Song Yuhan. At first, I didn't want to look at him, but he stubbornly came over and grabbed my hand, looking at me pitifully. Moxin, please don't be angry with me, okay? Yushu has been without parents since she was little. She's very pitiful. I'm only concerned about this. Just because my life is better than hers? I couldn't hold it in anymore, and tears started to pour from my eyes. Song Yuhan made me feel unfamiliar and also disgusted. He wiped my tears while anxiously explaining, "That's not what I meant. All right, let's not talk about her. If you keep crying, I'll feel even more heartbroken." Heartbroken, you say? You should just be heartbroken and leave. He comforted me with sweet words, and honestly, I was susceptible to this kind of talk. Even though I felt wronged, once Song Yuhan coaxed me, I felt like it wasn't such a big deal after all. Since I wasn't here to argue with him, I finally calmed down. I glared at him with red eyes, and he obediently sat there, letting me stare at him. In the end, he even used a handkerchief to wipe my tears. There was a smell on the handkerchief that didn't belong to him, a strong gardenia fragrance. I glanced at the gardenia flowers embroidered on the handkerchief, and my heart hurt. I remembered he used to like camellias, the redder, the better. It seemed 3 years was enough to change someone's preferences. Flowers change, and so do people. I didn't want to speak or look at him anymore. Just then, the servant who used to always follow him anxiously rushed towards the back mountain, his voice hoarse from panic. "Young master, it's bad. Miss Yuzhu fell into the water." I didn't even have time to see what the servant looked like before Song Yuhan jumped up in a panic and scolded, "You useless bunch." I stood there dazed, watching him run off. In my memory, he had never spoken like that before. He had changed completely. On the way back to the estate from the palace, I heard nothing but noisy gossip. Everyone was saying that Song Yuhan had really fallen for Meng Yuzhu, even diving into the icy winter water for her without a second thought to save her. After rescuing her, the two of them closely embraced, looking like a pair of star-crossed lovers. As for me, I was just the old flame replaced. I leaned against my mother's shoulder, feeling dispirited, as if my thoughts had sunk into the winter pool, too tired to think of anything else. In the past, Song Yuhan always used to call my name. When Song Yuhan had just moved back from Lini to Chang'an, the letters came every day. Later, it became every half-month, then once a month, until finally it was only 1 letter a year. Everyone said that Song Yuhan loved me deeply, with paintings and calligraphy on the table, all about me. But now I doubted, was he painting me or Meng Yuzhu? Or was it his so-called deep royal affection that he portrayed? The so-called childhood sweethearts, mutual affection, it was nothing more than this. The appearance of Meng Yuzhu, with the same face but a completely different personality, was enough to completely replace me. Tao Tao grumbled in my ear. That fox, Meng Yuzhu. All wet, clinging to the prince. How shameless. Exactly, she just knows how to look pitiful and seduce the prince. If she won the prince's heart, isn't it just because of her face? I just want to tear her face apart and see if the prince would still look at her. The wet nurse joined in. My mother didn't speak the whole time, allowing me to lean on her. I knew very well that this marriage was no easy feat, that the Shin family had climbed high by relying on it. If we could secure it, it would benefit my father's position in the court and my aunt's position in the palace. But my mother spoiled me and couldn't bear to see me suffer. In this dilemma, it was hard for her to speak. Tao Tao angrily grabbed my hand and rubbed it. "Miss, are you really going to let her keep causing trouble like this? Song Yuhan is the emperor's younger brother. What can I do if he likes someone else?" After saying that, I straightened up, regained my composure, and sneered. The marriage was decreed by the emperor. Once I marry in, I'll be the princess. Right now, I can't do anything, but who knows what will happen in the future? The next day at noon, I had just laid down to rest when Tao Tao, with a dark face, told me that Song Yuhan had arrived. I was exhausted and didn't want to see him, but then I thought of my mother and aunt sighed and got up. Song Yuhan brought my favorite drunken duck and 2 jars of osmanthus wine. Standing in front of the stone table in my courtyard, his expression was gentle. "Moxin, you're not angry with me anymore, are you?" I thought if only I could make you angry, but I didn't show it. I took the things from his hands, unwrapped the oil paper, tore off a duck leg, and took a bite. The fishy taste spread in my mouth, and I spat it out. He brushed past Tao Tao and eagerly came over to hand me a handkerchief. The gardenia scent was more unbearable than ever. I shook off his hand. "What kind of fragrance are you using? It stinks." He hurriedly tucked the handkerchief away, then came forward to gently wipe the corners of my lips with his finger. "Since you don't like it, I won't use it again." He then poured me a cup of tea to clear my palate. I didn't want to drink, nor did I want to eat. Looking at the sizzling drunken duck on the table, I used to love it, but now even one bite tasted fishy. Seeing that I hadn't spoken for a while, Song Yuhan began to talk to me, one sentence after another. This time, he seemed sober, not mentioning Meng Yuzhu at all. Instead, he brought up things from our childhood. I propped my head on my hand, neither responding nor answering. Song Yuhan took my hand, his gaze a little pleading. "Moxin, don't be like this, talk to me, okay? I've missed you so much these past 3 years." His words made me want to laugh. This is how Song Yuhan missed me? So, do you treat Meng Yuzhu well because you simply like her, or is it because she resembles me? I didn't really want an answer. Either way, it would feel fake to me. He tightened his grip on my hand. "Of course, it's because she resembles you. I love you, Moxin. I will definitely marry you." At that moment, I heard a noise from a distance, and when I looked, I saw Meng Yuzhu standing at the end of the corridor, her gaze burning as she looked in our direction. Song Yuhan froze, but I didn't react. I was used to him chasing after her without a second thought. But this time, it was different. Song Yuhan hesitated for a moment. Meng Yuzhu didn't make a scene. With a cold sneer, she turned around and walked away. Song Yuhan eventually chased after her, and I watched them push and shove each other in the long corridor of my house. It was honestly amusing. Meng Yuzhu cried and shouted, saying she would hit the pillar and die. I leaned against the side, watching the drama unfold, and remarked aloud, "Do you really think you can kill yourself by hitting my family's pillar? If you have the guts, go ahead." I didn't expect Meng Yuzhu to actually charge at the pillar, her pale forehead bleeding profusely. Song Yuhan, holding her limp body, stared at me in disbelief. "Shun Moxin, you're truly outrageous. Who allowed you to speak to her like that? You've really changed," he screamed in frustration. I was too scared to move. Watching Meng Yuzhu half dead, my body trembled, but I still tried to act tough. "Song Yuhan, is it me who's changed, or is it you?" Song Yuhan picked up Meng Yuzhu's body and coldly stared at me. "Shun Moxin, you're truly vicious." I watched his back as he left, feeling a sharp pain in my chest. By the time I came to my senses, I had vomited a pool of blood. It was red, glaringly bright. The world around me slowly turned dark, and at that moment, I truly thought to myself that death might be a relief. I groggily opened my eyes, the surroundings loud and chaotic. I was wearing a bright red wedding gown, standing alone in Song Yuhan's royal residence. Around me, guests pointed and whispered, "This Shin family girl really has no shame. She killed the prince's beloved, and now she shamelessly marries him. She deserves it." I didn't quite understand. Did Meng Yuzhu really die? I turned my head to look for Tao Tao, but didn't see her. The next moment, Song Yuhan pressed me onto the bed, ripping my clothes apart violently. But he didn't touch me. He just stared at me with a cold, sinister gaze. "Are you satisfied now?" I trembled in fear. Song Yuhan had always been gentle, never losing his temper with me. But now, with Meng Yuzhu dead, it seemed like he had gone mad. In the next moment, his eyes softened again. "Yuzhu, you're back, right?" My resistance seemed insignificant in that long, rainy night. Meng Yuzhu was truly dead, dead when Song Yuhan loved her most, and though I became his princess, I lost everything. At first, I tried to resist, but each time, Song Yuhan became more brutal. It hurt so much. Eventually, I gave in, and I became pregnant. In the dark and endless royal residence, this was my only consolation. But I couldn't keep the child, and in the early spring, while making offerings at the temple, someone pushed me down a cliff. The excruciating pain enveloped me, and I felt life slipping away, both mine and the child's. At that moment, I still hoped Song Yuhan would come to save me. And indeed, he came, crazed, holding me in his arms, whispering over and over in my ear, "Yuzhu, I knew you weren't dead. I knew you weren't dead. The one who should have died is Shun and Mo Exine. You're not dead, right?" When I woke up, my pillow was drenched. My father, mother, and Tao Tao were all gathered at my bedside. My mother's eyes were red from crying, and when she saw I was awake, she cried even harder. My father, holding back tears, hugged my mother and comforted her. "The child is awake. Don't disturb her." Looking at the familiar faces, I felt as if I had been away for a lifetime. It was as if I had been trapped in Song Yuhan's palace for so long that there was no light, only coldness surrounding me. I didn't speak, but tears started flowing one by one. My mother, trembling with fear, kept calling my name. After a long while, I grasped my mother's hand, feeling like all the tears had dried up. "Mother, can I not marry Song Yuhan?" Before my father could say anything, my mother held my hand in her palms and forced a smile. "We won't marry him. Who cares if he's from the royal family? Our girl will surely have a better marriage." Father nodded. "That's right. No marriage." Only then did I feel at ease and fall back to sleep. I didn't rest for long before I could get out of bed and move around, but I still curled up in bed, unwilling to leave it. Tao Tao told me that Meng Yuzhu was not dead. Song Yuhan had taken her to the palace overnight, and with the help of the imperial doctors, she had been saved. Meanwhile, I only had a few medicines from the house doctor. The treatment was worlds apart. The next day, as soon as I woke up, I heard a commotion outside the yard. Tao Tao's voice came through. "Your Highness, my master has already spoken with His Majesty. This marriage is off. You should stop coming. Isn't Miss Meng seriously ill? You should go be with her. Our young lady almost died. Her health is still weak, and she can't meet anyone. Mo Xian, I know you're awake. I heard you were ill. Are you feeling better now?" I didn't respond, but he continued. "Mo Xian, please talk to me. That day, I spoke harshly, but your words were also inappropriate. Let's each take a step back and don't be angry with me, okay? Marriage is not a child's play." I still didn't answer. Song Yuhan seemed to have lost patience. Gritting his teeth, he said, "Mo Xian, if you are determined to break off the engagement, go to His Majesty and say it yourself." I opened the door. "Fine, I'll go." I sat in the carriage on the way to the palace, without saying a word. Tao Tao nervously rubbed my hand. "Miss, you just recovered. You don't need to care about him. Master has already spoken with the Emperor," and the Emperor agreed. Song Yuhan's carriage followed closely behind. When we reached the palace, Song Yuhan couldn't bear not to be close to me, walking beside me while trying to persuade me. "Mo Xian, Please don't do this. I didn't want to see him, and I didn't want to talk to him. On the way, we met Eunuch Lu from the palace, who led us to the Empress Dowager's palace. The emperor was playing chess with the dowager when I entered. I immediately knelt down. I pay my respects to His Majesty. I wish to annul my engagement with Song Yuhan. I will never marry him, even if I have to marry a dog or a chicken. My engagement with Song Yuhan was officially annulled. Tao Tao felt secretly pleased and kept praising me for handling things decisively. My mother, though worried about my reputation, kept saying I had done the right thing, especially after Song Yuhan made me vomit blood. My father was the most worried, not about my family's future or my career, but about my life. Because Meng Yuzhu was more seriously injured, rumors about me had already spread like wildfire in the capital. Now, having broken off the engagement with a royal relative, no family in Chang'an would want to marry me for fear of offending Song Yuhan. I ate the bird's nest soup absently, saying, "Father, don't worry. If no one wants to marry me, I'll just stay with you both for the rest of my life." Father was furious, puffing his cheeks. "What are you saying? When your mother and I are gone, and your aunt is no longer here, who will protect you? You've offended the prince, and if you don't find someone to rely on, won't you be bullied to death?"
He placed his hand on his chest.
He wasn't wrong. The emperor was old, and it was uncertain when the throne would change hands. Even if it did, Song Yuhan would still be part of the royal family. If he wanted to make my life difficult, it would be easier than crushing an aunt. Maybe I should become a nun. He wouldn't dare trouble me then, right? Mother immediately disagreed. "Don't say such depressing things. There must be a good family in Lini. I'll think of something." This topic was too heavy, but it was indeed a pressing issue. The engagement was broken off decisively, but the hidden dangers were many, which kept me up all night. My headache was already unbearable, and then my mother woke me early, smiling widely. "Moxin. Hurry and pack up, the young marquis is coming soon." "Young marquis?" I was confused and dazed.
"Yes."
"It's Jing Shua," she added. I still couldn't remember, and she sighed. "Yun Jing Shua, the young Marquis of Jinbei." Yun Jing Shua. Yun Jing Shua? The long-forgotten memories suddenly resurfaced. I pulled the blanket over my head. I won't meet him. I won't meet him, even if I die. Unlike the idol prince Song Yuhan, the Yun family of the northern general's house, although they share the same surname, Yun, are of legitimate imperial bloodline. Their ancestor was the older brother of the emperor, both born of the same mother. While the elder brother led military campaigns, the younger brother sat on the throne, and their story became a well-known historical tale. The northern general is exceptionally brave, but has always disliked the imperial court. To avoid suspicion, he took his wife's surname, Yun, to distance himself from the imperial family and prove he had no interest in vying for power. Instead, he requested to guard the borderlands. Generation after generation, the northern general held military power. The various tribes in the northern regions revered the family, bowing to the imperial authority of Shang dynasty. Even if the imperial power were to decline one day, the northern general's family would remain strong. The emperor greatly valued the northern general and dared not treat him lightly. Yun Jingchua, the current northern general's only son, although not yet titled as the duke, was widely called Little Duke. However, this powerful young duke, who ruled the north, once suffered a major setback at my hands. At that time, I didn't understand, thinking he was just a delicate beauty. But later, when I came to understand, I wanted to leave the northern regions so badly that I urged my mother to return to Lini. Since then, I locked away that unpleasant memory. Yun Jingchua, is here? Isn't he in the northern frontier? 10,000 miles away. What's he doing here? I asked as my mother forcibly dragged me out of bed. Che. My mother glared at me. Don't worry about why he's here. Now that he is, you need to seize the opportunity. You spent some time with him when you were younger. Since he's in Chang'an, you should reconnect and build a relationship. I don't want to, I responded firmly. My mother, frustrated, sighed. Yun Jingchua is the future northern general. He's a tyrant of the north, far more powerful than someone like Song Yuhan, who holds no real power. If you can marry him, your life will be much easier. She started wiping her eyes, squeezing and squeezing, but no tears came out. Your father, and I just want you to find a good family. After we're gone, you'll be all right. All right, all right. I sighed deeply. Fine, I'll go. In the end, I was sent off in a carriage, dressed in a bright, decorated outfit. Seeing my miserable expression, Tao Tao was curious. Miss, why don't you want to meet the little Duke? I've heard he's more beautiful than Pan, and a rare beauty. I despised that face of his. I let out another sigh. What's going on? Tao Tao asked, even more curious. I slumped against the window, feeling hopeless. When I was a kid, I thought he was a girl. I dragged him to the bathhouse and stripped him clean. Are you happy now? My mother had specifically arranged for us to take separate carriages. Several times I wanted to back out, but Tao Tao stopped me. When we arrived, my mother urged me to get out of the carriage, but I pretended to have a stomach ache and refused to leave. Soon, I heard a commotion, the sound of hooves echoing like a battlefield, signaling that many people had arrived. My mother quickly pulled up the curtain and went forward. The Northern General's family rarely returned to Chang'an, mainly due to the distance and the Northern General's strong influence in recent years. The emperor, whose power was slightly weaker, had tried to win them over and even considered marrying a princess to the north, but the old duke had declined. Now, Yun Jingchua had traveled all the way to Chang'an, and the emperor could barely contain his excitement. The city gate was bustling with activity, and I didn't want to get off the carriage because I saw Song Yuhan's carriage following closely behind. The sound of hooves ceased, and a clear voice rang out. Thank you, Gong Gong, for your hard work. This is quite a grand reception. The voice was unfamiliar, but I recognized it immediately. Yun Jingchua and I had met when we were both children, around 8 or 9 years old. Back then, his voice hadn't even fully changed. He didn't speak much, and was often bullied. He never fought back and would just quietly watch. I was straightforward and often stood up for him, getting into fights with others. He didn't say a word, just nodded meekly. Otherwise, I wouldn't have mistaken him for a girl. The young master has traveled a long way. His Majesty has ordered someone to take care of the Northern General's estate, and he will be able to settle in soon, said Song Yuhan. I sighed deeply, wishing I could leave as quickly as possible. Yun Jingchua laughed, but his tone was unreadable. No need for the prince to worry. I have an old friend in Chang'an. I felt a wave of unease. Sure enough, the next moment he asked with a smile, Shin Bomu, does your house have any extra rooms? I immediately rushed to the window and saw my mother grinning so widely her ears almost touched her shoulders. My eyes nearly went blind from the shock. She ignored my silent warning and nodded vigorously. Yes, yes, of course. Little Duke still remembers me? My daughter, Ma Xin, often talks about you. Do you remember her? My pupils contracted in shock. What a blatant lie. Yun Jingchua, dressed in a pale yellow robe, sat upright on his horse. He pulled the reins and gave me a shallow smile, his eyes locking onto mine with precision. Of course, I remember her. He was doing this on purpose. At first, I thought I was overthinking it, but now I was almost certain he had returned just to see me embarrassed. He glanced at me, and I immediately shrank back. It seemed like I had walked out of one wolf's den and straight into another. Maybe I should just become a nun. The heir of the northern town marquis, returning to Chang'an, caused a stir among the royal family and relatives. The emperor hosted a banquet to welcome him, and all the noble young women in the city gathered, eager to get a glimpse of the legendary young and promising marquis. Many of them, like me, wanted to climb this high branch. My mother couldn't stop praising Yun Jingxua in my ear. Jingxua has such a good memory. We didn't stay long in the northern lands, but after all these years, he still remembers me and even wants to stay in our Shun residence. He really gave us face. I wish his memory wasn't so good, I said, feeling increasingly down. My mother slapped me on the forehead. Don't waste this opportunity. Jingxua is cheerful, lively, and talented. If you miss this chance, you won't find another one. I felt like dying and slumped deeper into my seat, silently praying that Jingxua wouldn't notice me. But as soon as he arrived, he walked straight toward me. Sister Shen, it's been so many years. Do you still remember me? I was so startled that I broke into a cold sweat. I didn't dare look at him. My mother poked me in the sleeve, pinching my flesh. My hand holding the pastry trembled, causing me to nearly drop it in pain. Why, yes, I remember, I stammered. Just then, I saw Song Yuhan entering the banquet with Meng Yuzhu. This time, he didn't pay attention to her and instead kept his gaze on me, his brow furrowed tightly. Our eyes met, and he immediately broke away from Meng Yuzhu and walked toward me. Ma Xin, are you feeling better? I didn't want to speak to him, but neither did I want to speak to Jingxua, so I decided to remain silent. But before I could, a scorching hand gripped my wrist. Jingxua leaned in, taking the pastry I was holding and popping it into his mouth, propping his head up as he looked at me. I'm new here. Could you take care of me, Ma Xin? He had grown tall and sturdy, his features more defined, handsome without being effeminate, completely unlike the fragile young man I had known. My mother was so thrilled that she was almost in tears, while I struggled to pull my hand away, but it was only gripped tighter. Jingxua sat next to me and casually said, I don't know anyone here. Is it all right if I sit next to you? Young master, this isn't proper. Song Yuhan's voice came coldly, his fist clenched tight, his gaze icy as he stared at Jingxua. Jingxua wasn't afraid, releasing my hand, but then playing with the pastry on my plate. Proper? Jingxua, have never been one to follow the rules. I felt like I was sitting on pins and needles. This banquet wasn't a welcome for Jingxua, it was my trial. Song Yuhan sat at a distance, glaring at me with vicious eyes. Every time Jingxua got too close, he would crush a cup. By the end of the night, many cups had been broken. Meng Yuzhu, however, was focused on Jingxua, watching him intently as if calculating something. The noble young ladies in the hall sent me looks sharp enough to slice. Even the emperor and empress, seated high in the hall, would glance at us from time to time, whispering to each other. I stared at the floor, trying to shrink into a crack, while my mother was beaming, as if I had just won a top honor in the exams. When the banquet ended, Jingxua stuck to me, blocking my gaze completely. After he escorted me to the carriage, he followed on horseback. At the residence, my mother quickly sent Tao Tao away, urging me to show Jingxua around the house. I looked at his stunning face and couldn't help but feel awkward, my feet digging into the floor as I recalled the past. I'm back. Are you unhappy? His voice was soothing, more melodious than Song Yuhan's, and much gentler. No, I'm not. I started to speak, but was suddenly pressed against a pillar. He looked down at me, his dark pupils reflecting the moonlight. His expression darkened slightly. Are you still holding on to Song Yuhan? We were so close I could hear his breath. The scent of wood from the northern lands was comforting but unsettling. I turned my face away.
No.
Then why did you cry when you saw Song Yuhan earlier? He grabbed my chin and forced me to face him, his eyes intense. I forced a smile. It was my mother's doing. The next day, rumors spread wildly that Jingxua had come back to Chang'an upon hearing that my engagement with Song Yuhan had been cancelled, and he was rushing to propose to me. Since the engagement was broken off, my parents had been the subject of much gossip, but now they could finally hold their heads high. Looking at Jingxua playing with a cat in my yard, I asked, "Did you come back just to see me make a fool of myself?" Jingxua smiled. Of course not. I came to propose. Stop making fun of me. Now I'm the talk of all Chang'an. Besides, I sighed, as I didn't feel that close to him. While I had spent 5 or 6 years with Song Yuhan, I had only spent less than 3 months with Jingxua. Besides what? His eyebrow arched, his hand paused, and he stared at me intently. I'm not that familiar with you. Not familiar? His voice, pleasant yet laced with a hint of coldness, suggested he wasn't happy with my response. I was about to flee to my room, but he caught my arm, pulling me into his embrace. He whispered in my ear, "If we're honest with each other, are we not familiar?" My ears instantly turned red. "Why, you're too petty." "I don't mind you looking at me." Frustrated, I thought back to the time when I was the one who had stripped first. He grabbed my chin again, his voice low and unsettling. "Don't mind? That won't do. I have to take responsibility." "It's nothing happened." "What responsibility?" I was so embarrassed that I wanted to crawl under a rock. "Shunmashin." The sudden voice startled me. I looked up and saw Song Yuhan striding through the corridor, his gaze fixated on me. It dawned on me that my actions with Yunjing Shua had been too intimate. I tried to pull away, but he held me tighter. He whispered in my ear, "Didn't you say you didn't care about him? Why are you struggling?" Yunjing Shua and Song Yuhan fought in my courtyard. It was less of a fight and more of a one-sided beating from Yunjing Shua, and I didn't intervene. By the time the Wang family arrived, Song Yuhan had already passed out. Soon, a eunuch came to summon Yunjing Shua to the palace. My parents were startled and bombarded me with questions in rapid succession. I waved my hand. I can't beat Yunjing Shua, and I definitely can't beat Song Yuhan. If they hurt me while tussling, that wouldn't be good, so I didn't get involved. Although I said that, I still felt a sense of relief, almost wishing Yunjing Shua had thrown a few more punches. My parents were still anxious when, not long after, Yunjing Shua returned as if nothing had happened. He smiled brightly, patting his chest and reassuring them. "Uncle, Aunt, don't worry. I didn't kill him. He'll be fine after a week or two of rest." Despite his reassurance, my mother was still nervous. She opened her mouth to say something but swallowed the words and kept quiet. Yunjing Shua saw through it and stood up respectfully to bow to my parents, which made them almost weak in the knees. Then he said, "Uncle, Aunt, I have admired Mashin for many years. To be honest, I came back to Chang'an this time to gauge both your opinions and Mashin's. If you approve, my mother will travel from the Northern Territories tomorrow to arrange the engagement." My parents exchanged a look but remained silent and turned to look at me. I glanced at Yunjing Shua, a little apprehensive. After all, Song Yuhan had said something similar to me before. But remembering what happened in my previous life, I turned and walked away, ignoring everyone. As night fell, Yunjing Shua sat on the steps outside my door and laughed softly. "Do you think I purposely beat Song Yuhan to force you to marry me?" Since Song Yuhan lost out with me, the Wang family and I had become sworn enemies. If I wanted to find refuge, I could only turn to Yunjing Shua, and I had to consider that. When I didn't respond, he added, "I didn't have any other intentions. I just saw him and wanted to punch him. It's as simple as that." He laughed again. "I've never liked him. You wouldn't know, but when I heard you broke off the engagement with him, I was so happy I couldn't sleep all night and rushed to Chang'an at the break of dawn." He laughed heartily. "I was so angry, I nearly lost my mind." "Yunjing Shua, you still find this funny?" "Of course, I find it funny. Not only do I want to laugh, but I want to make you laugh too." His words made my heart warm, and I softly got out of bed and walked toward the door, thinking I'd peek through the crack to see him. But after a quick scan, he was nowhere to be seen. Was that just my imagination? I muttered. The next second, a thin red note was slipped through the door crack. His voice followed. "I went to the palace today and asked the emperor for permission. If you're happy and willing, you can sign it later." After Song Yuhan was beaten, things calmed down for a while. Yunjing Shua became even more accustomed to living in my house, knowing every little detail, including the size of the dog hole in our wall. This time, his return coincided with the Mid-Autumn Festival, and the palace held a banquet that lasted from morning to night. Eunuch Lu personally came to escort Yunjing Shua. Thanks to him, my parents made quite an impression when they entered the palace. As soon as Yunjing Shua entered the palace, he was called to the emperor's presence. My aunt grabbed my hand and smiled, asking, "So, is the young lord here to propose?" I blushed. "Aunt, don't talk nonsense." Yunjing Shua's engagement was far from ordinary. It was an engagement to the family of the Marquis of Northern Defense, extremely important. I couldn't just say anything carelessly. The Empress, having heard the conversation, called me over and smiled kindly. I think you two make a good match. What do you think? The Empress and my aunt got along well, without the usual political schemes, so the two of them sat together and studied me, urging, why not just marry him? I was caught between them and wished I could escape to find a reason to leave. At that moment, Song Yuhan entered the hall. The Empress and the noble consort immediately stopped talking, and I finally got a moment to breathe. After a while, Peach Peach called me outside. Just as I stepped out of the hall, I was stopped by Song Yuhan. I respectfully greeted him, intending to leave quickly, but he stepped forward and blocked my way. Is this all just to spite me? The way you're acting with Yunjing Shua? I sneered. What could I possibly do to spite you? Did you forget your beloved Meng Yuzhu today? He was standing there alone, not responding to me, his face devoid of any smile. I didn't want to say anything more and walked toward the back of the courtyard, but I couldn't find Peach Peach anywhere. Song Yuhan followed behind me in silence. I didn't take him seriously, and by the time I reached the fake mountain at the back, he suddenly pinned me to the rocks and kissed me. His face was so close that all the dark memories surged in my mind. It was Song Yuhan who had torn my clothes, his gaze sinister and violent, his actions making me more terrified than rational. I pulled a hairpin from my hair and stabbed it into his back. He winced in pain and released me. I didn't care about anything else and quickly ran forward, but there was no one around. Disgust surged through my chest, and I had been holding on to a faint hope that Song Yuhan wasn't truly evil. But he kept crushing those hopes and making me fall further. He ignored the pain and walked toward me. Gripping my hairpin tightly, I shouted, "Don't come any closer." He frowned. "Do you really hate me that much? Ma Xin, you weren't like this before. Is it Yunjing Shua who's bewitched you? Or is it his power that has caught your eye?" I was overwhelmed by disgust. As he got close to me, I suddenly pushed him away and ran toward the hallway. "Help me, save me," I kept chanting in my mind, tears flowing uncontrollably. I didn't want to fall into Song Yuhan's hands again. Finally, I ran out of strength and collapsed into a very warm embrace. I heard his teeth clenching. The familiar scent of Northern would brought me a sense of safety. Without thinking, I shrank into Yunjing Shua's arms, crying uncontrollably. He held me tightly, whispering, "Don't be afraid, Ma Xin. No one will ever dare to treat you like this again. I swear it." When I was carried back by Yunjing Shua, no one dared to stop us. This matter was kept under wraps, but Song Yuhan didn't benefit from it either. According to Tao Dao, that day, Meng Yuzhu tried to seduce Yunjing Shua with despicable methods, but somehow the news got out and was caught by the Empress. Outside, no one knew what Song Yuhan had done, but within the royal family, it was a different story. The Emperor, who had been trying to facilitate my marriage with Yunjing Shua to win over the Northern Duke, was embarrassed by Song Yuhan's reckless actions. Yunjing Shua remained magnanimous on the outside but wouldn't let go of the matter internally, demanding an explanation from the Emperor. Ultimately, it was decided that Song Yuhan would be granted a fief and sent away from Chang'an, with a decree that he could not return without summons. The official reason was that Song Yuhan had allowed his maid to seduce the heir of the Northern Duke, engaging in improper conduct. I locked myself in my room for several days, not daring to leave the bed. Even when my mother came to visit, I couldn't bear to see her. I couldn't even close my eyes without the haunting memories flooding back, taking me back to the cold, desolate mansion where Song Yuhan tormented and degraded me. There were times I woke up, unsure if I was still dreaming or if it was real. It felt like I was trapped in that place, unable to escape. I had no appetite and barely ate. Yunjing Shua had been busy lately, often not at home. I heard from my mother that his mother had come to Chang'an, and he had gone back to the Duke's residence. I actually missed him a little. Later, in the evening, Tao Tao came stomping towards me, clearly upset, as if she wanted to say something but hesitated. I asked what was wrong. She puffed her cheeks and said, Originally, Song Yuhan was supposed to be sent away today, but a group of royal relatives strongly opposed it, so it got delayed. The key thing is, she paused for a moment and continued. The emperor said he should wait until after the Mid-Autumn festival to leave, but if he stays any longer, he might never leave. The young marquis didn't even say anything. I knew it wasn't easy to get Song Yuhan to leave Chang'an.
But I didn't want to get involved.
Just as Tao Tao was muttering about Yun Jingshua, a soft cough interrupted us. She quickly shut up, changed her expression, and smiled as she ushered Yun Jingshua into the room, then scampered off. Yun Jingshua entered carrying a food box, setting it on my table as if it were his own home. When the box was opened, a strong, spicy scent filled the air. I wasn't a fan of spicy food, but I was curious, so I leaned in to take a look. He caught me peeking and grinned, sitting down at the table. "It smells great." I was so irritated I could feel my heart racing. Of course, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I wished he'd go back to his duke's residence to stop bothering me. Seeing that I wasn't responding, he grinned and coaxed me. "Moxian, come try it." I ignored him, but he didn't rush. "Are you unable to move? Should I carry you over?" I jumped out of bed, determined not to let him carry me. When I reached the table, I saw a bowl of bright red chili peppers drizzled with golden oil, still sizzling. "What is this?" I asked, feeling a bit terrified. Was he trying to make me suffer? Yun Jingshua sat me down, moved the peppers aside, and then took a bowl and expertly scooped the peppers into it. Underneath was a layer of tender fish slices. He added a piece to my bowl. "This part has no bones, try it." I froze, not daring to use my chopsticks because of the overwhelming spiciness. I waved my hands repeatedly. "I can't eat spicy food, I'll pass." But before I could protest more, he forcefully shoved a piece of fish into my mouth. I was so overwhelmed by the spiciness that I drank almost half a pot of tea. Yun Jingshua, however, wasn't worried at all and leaned in with a smile. "Is it good?" I wanted to yell at him, but despite the overwhelming heat, the fish was actually delicious. I reluctantly nodded. I stared at the spicy peppers, lost in thought. I had always avoided spicy food before, as Song Yuhan would always buy me light dishes. Now I realized it wasn't that I couldn't eat spicy food, but simply that I had never tried it. Yun Jingshua noticed I was lost in thought and gently asked in my ear, "Are you mad at me for not doing anything and letting Song Yuhan stay in Chang'an?" I instinctively shook my head. "No, you have your difficulties too. The Northern Duke holds military power, but in the royal family's eyes, he is still a subject. The Northern Duke's lineage has been loyal for generations, and military achievements are not something Yun Jingshua can use to intimidate others in the capital, especially as the emperor's younger brother." Just as I was about to continue with my emotional response, I saw Yun Jingshua grinning like a fool. "What difficulties do I have? If he leaves so soon, how will I be able to torment him?" Suddenly, I felt a little worried about Song Yuhan. What was going on? When my mother saw me walking out with Yun Jingshua, both of us neatly dressed, she jumped up with joy. I couldn't help but feel a little helpless seeing her smile like a bright sunflower. Yun Jingshua suggested we go out to see the lanterns, a nice stroll to change the mood. After being cooped up in the house for several days, I was ready to go out and change my scenery. However, as soon as I stepped outside, I saw Song Yuhan standing at the steps of my house, looking disheveled. When he saw me, he instinctively stepped forward but then, seeing the distance between us, took a step back. "Moxian, I owe you an apology for what happened that day." Yun Jingshua stood behind me. When he saw I wasn't frightened, he didn't speak but gently played with the ribbon hanging from my waist. I gave him a cold look and sneered. "Are you afraid no one knows? You're standing right here in front of my house to tell me this." He looked hurt, his eyes dimming. "Moxian, I really can't live without you." I found his words laughable and tugged Yun Jingshua to leave, but he reached out and stopped me, still holding on. "You really can't forgive me?" I suppressed my urge to roll my eyes. "Song Yuhan, how old are you? Are you a child?" I tried to leave again, but he blocked me once more. Yun Jingshua, now irritated, stepped forward, pulling me behind him without saying a word, simply glaring at him. Song Yuhan's expression changed immediately, and he sneered. Moxin, you always mention me and Meng Yuzhu. Do you know what Yunjing Shua and Meng Yuzhu did? I was stunned, and before Yunjing Shua could speak, I pulled him behind me, laughing with fury. Song Yuhan, you and Meng Yuzhu really are a perfect match, equally shameless. I looked at Song Yuhan now and felt like I was seeing a stranger. Once, he was gentle and kind, never saying a harsh word. But since coming to Chang'an and meeting Meng Yuzhu, he had completely changed. I didn't want to engage with him anymore. I sneered coldly. Enough, Song Yuhan, don't say another word. I just don't like you anymore. I should have done this the moment I received Song Yuhan's letter. Just don't do this anymore. Don't make me hate you. The Lantern Festival was ultimately a bust. My mother sat in the courtyard, so angry that her hair seemed to stand on end. She was cursing Song Yuhan, throwing insults without using any vulgar words and keeping them varied. Yunjing Shua sat beside her, peeling lotus seeds one by one, carefully removing the lotus hearts, nodding along while listening to her curses. For every curse my mother threw, he responded with an occasional comment of his own. I looked at the two of them, feeling like I was the odd one out. They seemed more like a real mother and son than anything. Before the sky had even darkened, my father returned, his face as black as thunder, stomping in as if he were about to kill someone. When he saw Yunjing Shua, he calmed down, letting out a long sigh. My mother asked him what had happened, but he didn't answer right away. It wasn't until Yunjing Shua left that he finally spoke. He said that Song Yuhan had completely changed his usual manner and knelt before the emperor, pleading to marry Meng Yuzhu, asking for her to be his official wife and for a 10-mile bridal procession. The emperor was furious. It was hard enough to keep him in Chang'an under Yunjing Shua's influence, but Meng Yuzhu's behavior was improper. She had tried to seduce Yunjing Shua, and with no noble background, she was unworthy to be Song Yuhan's wife. Yet, Song Yuhan was persistent. The emperor threw an inkstone at him, smashing his head, but he still begged to marry Meng Yuzhu. As my father spoke, he occasionally glanced at me. I was just eating the lotus seeds Yunjing Shua had peeled for me, not really listening. My mother had figured out by now that my heart was set against him, and with Yunjing Shua as a comparison, she had nothing nice to say about Song Yuhan. So, what happened? Did His Majesty agree? I asked just to make conversation. My father nodded. The emperor has only one younger brother, so he put up with the trouble. But once the wedding is over, he'll probably send him back to his fief. Otherwise, the Duke of the North might not be happy. I stretched lazily after hearing this. Song Yuhan was really pushing me to my limits. He'd always threatened me with life and death, using soft, indirect ways to control me. I accepted it before because I loved him. But now, he could marry whoever he wanted. It had nothing to do with me. Once Song Yuhan and Meng Yuzhu's wedding was settled, rumors spread all over the city. People said that the white moonlight couldn't compare to the vermilion mole. It was also rumored that Meng Yuzhu was the long-lost youngest daughter of the Pingchuan Marquis, who had recently returned to her family and cried in front of the mansion, performing some dramatic display. No one knew whether it was true. Others said I was playing hard to get, that I had let Song Yuhan think I was avoiding him, but look, now he was really going to marry Meng Yuzhu. They even said I was hiding under the covers crying. I found it amusing. Song Yuhan played at being deeply in love, but he ended up tricking himself. Now, he was making a big deal about marrying Meng Yuzhu, not because he loved her, but because he couldn't get anything from me anymore. He wanted to make me jealous and force me to soften up. I was tired of the little games we used to play. To him, what he couldn't have was always the most precious. Just like in the past life, he mourned for Meng Yuzhu after she died, and now, even though he married her, he would always hold on to the memory of me. I understood him too well, and now I knew that Meng Yuzhu's life wouldn't be much better than mine. After a few days, the invitation from the Pingchuan Marquis residence arrived. It said they were hosting a banquet to celebrate Meng Yuzhu's return and invited all the noble women in Chang'an to attend. It was partly to help her build connections, and partly to clear up rumors about her improper behavior. My father had a close relationship with the Pingchuan Marquis. When the Shin family was in trouble, my aunt was isolated in the palace, and it was the Pingchuan Marquis who risked his life to speak up for my father, securing the Shin family's current position. This was a favor I couldn't refuse. Yun Jingshua had been busy lately and hadn't been home much. But on that day, he came early to wait for me, ready to accompany me to the banquet. With him there, no one dared to gossip. When we reached the Pingchuan Marquis residence, Meng Yuzhu stood under the plaque, wearing a golden satin dress with a simple pearl hairpin. From afar, she looked almost identical to me, dressed in the same style I liked. I couldn't help but stare at her, then asked Yun Jingshua, "Do you think she looks like me?" Yun Jingshua chuckled. "She's just trying to imitate you." I got out of the carriage, and there were already many people around. Meng Yuzhu smiled at me, but her gaze was filled with venom. I ignored her and walked in with Tao Tao. At the beginning of the banquet, she played the role of the graceful, gentle host, handing out sachets to all the noble women. The scent of gardenias was so strong it made people dizzy. I tossed my sachet to Tao Tao, planning to leave once enough time had passed. But as I turned the corner, I was blocked by her. She frowned, eyeing me with hostility, and after a moment, she coldly asked, "Shinmashin, are you Shinmashin?" I smiled. "I'm not Shinmashin. Are you?" She laughed, sizing me up. "You're just someone who's known the prince for longer. If he had met me first, you'd be just like me. Now you have confidence, but it's all because of Yun Jingshua's influence. Do you really think he's like an idiot who just likes you?" She laughed darkly, as if she knew some secret. Then she leaned in close to me, speaking through clenched teeth like she was cursing me. "The Duke of the North Sun, who destroyed a city at 16, is as calculating as a lump of coal. Do you really think he'll always like you?" she said with a confident smile. "We'll see, Shinmashin." After returning from the Pingchuan Marquis' residence, I started to feel uneasy. Yun Jingshua was about to leave, but I wouldn't let him. I insisted on him staying. He didn't get angry. Instead, he smiled at me and said, "What's this? Haven't seen me for a few days and you miss me?" I clicked my tongue at him, then leaned on my hand and studied him. Meng Yuzhu's words kept playing in my mind. I knew well that Yun Jingshu wasn't as simple as he seemed. He wasn't as carefree and naive as his outward appearance suggested. On the contrary, just as Meng Yuzhu said, he had a very deep mind. "No way," Meng Yuzhu said, "you're like a honeycomb coal." "I just wanted to take a closer look," I said directly. Hearing that, Yun Jingshua smiled even more brightly. Did she really say that? I rolled my eyes. "You sound like you're familiar with her." He took a sip of tea, the corner of his lips curling slightly. For some reason, I felt like his eyes darkened for a moment, which made me uneasy. "Do you know her?" I stared into his eyes, puzzled. Yun Jingshua met my gaze. "Sort of." Seeing that I wasn't speaking, he took another sip of tea. "If you want to ask anything, feel free. I won't hide anything from you." I asked one question. "Do you really want to marry me?" "Yes." "Oh, then there's nothing else to discuss." "Do you trust me this much?" Yun Jingshua propped his chin and stared at me. I propped my chin as well. "If you dare lie to me, you'll end up like Song Yuhan. Then I must behave well and not follow in his footsteps." The day Song Yuhan and Meng Yuzhu were officially betrothed, I hadn't even gotten out of bed when the dowry from the Marquis of Jinbei was already being delivered to our door in a grand procession. I thought Yun Jingshua was being too extravagant. I even suspected that he'd thoroughly inspected our house and was figuring out how much stuff would fill it up. The scene caused quite a stir outside my house. Meanwhile, Song Yuhan's royal residence was eerily quiet. Only a few relatives were willing to show him some respect, while the rest avoided him. I heard that Meng Yuzhu had had a fierce argument with Song Yuhan, smashing everything in the house to pieces. As for why they argued, I didn't know, nor did I care. When Yun Jingshua's mother first saw me, her eyes lit up with excitement. She came over and carefully scrutinized me, then took my hand and wouldn't let go, constantly touching it. She kept saying that all she ever wanted in life was a daughter, but she had ended up with a lousy son. Seeing this, my mother got jealous, wishing she could snatch me away, and she kept wiping her hands under her sleeve. When both sets of parents met, they also set the wedding date. They would have one ceremony in Chang'an and another in the northern lands. After the Jinbei Marquis people left, my parents sat in the hall for a long time without saying a word. I looked at them, and they looked at me. My mother came over and took my hand. "Ma Xin, I'm a bit regretful. The northern lands are so far away, and after you're married, your father and I won't even be able to see you." She tried to persuade me. "Yunjingshuo doesn't seem that great. How about we wait a little longer?" My father cleared his throat and gave her a stern look. "What are you saying? We've already accepted the betrothal gifts." My mother, feeling wronged, rubbed my palm. "I was just saying. I knew they couldn't bear to part with me. Actually, our family has a small house in the northern lands, the place we stayed when we went there before. But after my father got promoted, we moved to Chang'an. So I smiled and comforted them. Just wait a few years. When father retires and returns to the northern lands, you can come and live with us. I've already spoken to Yunjingshuo about it. He said you can stay directly in the Marquis' residence. We'll always be together." My mother didn't say anything but blink her eyes and said she was tired, then dragged my father to sleep. I watched them leave, supporting each other, and my nose started to feel sour. Since the engagement with the Marquis of Jinbei, Yunjingshua's mother had no intention of staying at the Marquis' residence. She moved to our house just a few days later. At first, my mother didn't pay much attention, treating her respectfully, but in no time, they became inseparable, eating and sleeping together like the best of friends. They built a strong bond by gossiping about Song Yuhan, and my father was the most miserable, being sent to the guest room. Strangely enough, since Song Yuhan's engagement, the wedding date was never settled. Until one afternoon, news came from the palace. Song Yuhan's wedding was set for the 6th of February. When I heard that, I couldn't help but laugh. What a coincidence! It's the same day as mine. Tao Tao kept cursing him in front of me. It must be that Meng Yuzhu, always trying to match us up on the same day. How annoying! I fiddled with the jewelry in the box, which my mother and Yunjingshua's mother brought back this morning. They told me to pick out a style for the wedding set to be sent to the palace. "They're the ones with the problem. Let them be," I said. Tao Tao looked serious for once. "Miss, aren't you afraid they'll play any tricks, calculating against you and the young Marquis?" I trembled as I touched the headpiece in my hand, then sneered. "What kind of tricks could they play? This is Chang'an, the capital. Do they think they can rebel?" Yunjingshua had been too busy to be seen these days. Even his mother didn't know where he went. In the evening, my father returned from the palace, so angry that he kept sighing. Our family didn't treat Yunjingshua's mother like an outsider, so we spoke openly in front of her. The Marquis is clearly trying to challenge us. Even the Pingchuan Marquis is supporting him now. Today, they brought in 12 boxes of dowry, just like Jinbei Marquis' family. It's so infuriating. My mother started to get angry too, while Yunjingshua's mother just sipped her tea, looking calm and unbothered. I went over to comfort my parents, trying to ease the situation. What's there to fight about? He can prepare however much he wants. Anyway, after some time, he'll return to his fief, and I'll go back to the northern lands. We won't even see each other again, so there's no need to get upset. Yunjingshua's mother also advised, "Exactly, don't worry, dear. I'll write a letter to the northern lands tomorrow and have the Marquis send 12 more boxes over." My father, startled, nearly choked on his tea and waved his hands in protest. After some more chatting, everyone went back to their rooms. Just as I was leaving, Yunjingshua's mother grabbed my hand. She was beautiful, with willow-like eyebrows and phoenix eyes. Her age had only added grace to her, not a trace of hardship. Smiling, she held my hand and said, "Ma Xin, you have to trust Jingshua. Always trust him, no matter what. Do you understand? On the day of my wedding to Yunjingshua, The streets of Chang'an were filled with red silk, and all the taverns and tea houses in the city were rented out by the Jinbei home mansion, offering free tea to everyone. Cao Cao started preparing me early in the morning, and I stared at myself in the mirror, dressed in the wedding attire, suddenly feeling a bit afraid. In my past life, I wore the same red clothes, but I was mistreated and trampled upon. Due to customs, Yun Jingshua couldn't meet with me before the ceremony. However, his mother came early to accompany me, fearing I'd feel lonely. I waited for a long time, drank a cup of wine, but still didn't see the bridal procession. After a while, someone came in to say that Yun Jingshua had delayed the procession by half an hour to avoid crossing paths with the royal wedding party. My mother kept muttering about how this would ruin the auspicious time, while Yun Jingshua's mother just laughed and sat beside me, applying rouge on me. I began to feel sleepy, and suddenly the sounds outside became lively. Cao Cao immediately covered my face with the veil and led me out. Yun Jingshua took my hand carefully and helped me into the bridal sedan chair. I glimpsed my mother hiding behind my father, crying, but then she smiled when she saw me. My nose tingled, and I felt my heart drop. The journey went smoothly. The old marquis had arrived in Chang'an early and was still in his travel clothes, sitting in the main hall and laughing heartily. After the ceremony, I was sent to the bridal chamber, and it wasn't until evening that Yun Jingshua pushed open the door, grinning, and lifted my veil. He was cold, as though he had been outside for a long time. His hands were cold, and he carried a familiar scent, faint but unmistakable. I didn't address it, but pinched his arm. "Where did you go?" Yun Jingshua smiled and poured me a drink. "What's the matter? Missing me?" I spat at him, and he sat beside me, rubbing his palms, lost in thought. After a while, without a word, he pulled me into his embrace, so tightly I could hardly breathe. I hit him repeatedly. "Are you trying to strangle me? Watch out, or you'll end up like Song Yuhan." At the mention of Song Yuhan, he didn't loosen his grip. Instead, he hugged me even tighter. His breath was warm and shaky against my ear, and I felt as though he might have been crying. After a long while, he laughed softly and then, in a hoarse voice, said, "Mo Xian, this time, I finally married you." I didn't ask more questions. I just wrapped my arms around him, resting my head on his shoulder, and gently comforted him. "Yes, you did." The next morning, I was still groggy when Cao Cao dragged me out of bed, looking shocked as she stared at me. Yun Jingshua had gone out early to practice archery. I lazily lay in bed, not wanting to move. "Miss Song Yuhan, he's been exiled," Cao Cao exclaimed. My sleepiness evaporated in an instant, but my emotions flickered before settling down. After all, I had always had one lingering question. Was this yesterday? Yes. Cao Cao glanced around and leaned in closer. "Meng Yuzhu has gone mad too. I heard from Mama Lu this morning that she incited the prince to rebel. The betrothal gifts they brought in from outside the city were actually military equipment. Even Ping Chuan Ho is now locked up in his mansion, waiting for his punishment." I had a sinking feeling in my heart. Where is she now? Cao Cao hesitated for a long time before saying, "I heard she went to intercept the carriage of the powerful officials this morning and was dragged into an alley and beaten to death with clubs. It was a gruesome death." After speaking, she kept glancing out the window. "Do you think this has anything to do with the young marquis?" I stretched lazily, pretending I didn't hear her. "This morning I'm supposed to visit my mother-in-law, so stop talking. We're running out of time." Cao Cao didn't speak further and began to help me with my grooming. Before long, Yun Jingshua entered the room, his pale face covered with beads of sweat as he came over to rub against me. I pushed him away in disgust. "This is new clothes I'm wearing. Stay away from me, or I'll tell my parents, and they'll have you punished." He only seemed more pleased by my scolding, wagging his tail like a dog. "Did you know Song Yuhan tried to rebel?" he asked, propping his head up and playing with the hairpin in my hair. I was wiping off my lipstick and casually responded, "Did you do it?" He didn't try to hide it and proudly nodded. "Yes." Don't tell me that even his relatives letting him stay in Chang'an was arranged by you in secret. I glared at him. He didn't say anything, only smiled. He probably won't live for much longer, right?
He smiled again.
I glared at him. You really are like a briquette. Yun Jingshua leaned in closer. Well, now that you're married, what does it matter if I'm a briquette? These things are all about the methods used, not the process. What matters is the result. You don't know. He came closer, hugging my waist. I used so many tricks to marry you. I pushed his head away. Enough already. I've accepted my fate. Now, stop and let me get on with my things. He finally let go, but then sent Tao Tao out and dressed me himself, imitating a maid. Once I was dressed, he took my hand, grinning. Shall we go together? I pinched him again. Fine.
Side story.
When Yun Jingshua was 16, a rebellion broke out in a small town in the northern border. He led his troops there and wiped out the rebels cleanly. Few people survived in the town, and Yun Jingshua didn't care about the massacre his subordinates carried out. After all, not long ago, another small town in the northern border, with a population of several thousand, was also completely slaughtered by these tribal rebels. In the pile of corpses, he spotted a girl with a face he recognized all too well. As the long halberd was about to pierce her chest, she desperately kowtowed to Yun Jingshua, crying out, "Young master, look at me! Look at me!" She hurriedly wiped the dust from her face, trying to make Yun Jingshua recognize her. He fired an arrow, deflecting the halberd. He tugged on the reins, his face cold, with no trace of a smile, and looked at her coldly. "What's your name?" "Chung Yuzhu, I'm Chung Yuzhu," she exclaimed. Everyone at the Ho residence had heard that the young lord never showed interest in women, but today, he returned with one. He let her ride his horse and personally held the reins for her. The day Yun Jingshua brought Chung Yuzhu back to the northern border marquis residence, his mother immediately scolded him in private. However, not long afterward, lavish gifts started arriving at Chung Yuzhu's room. "These are all gifts from the lady. As long as you're obedient, there's plenty more where this came from," the maid said briefly. Chung Yuzhu gazed at the flowing satin and finely crafted jade jewels, looking at her reflection in the mirror, smiling more and more wickedly. What's wrong with being a vicious, supporting character? Isn't the northern border marquis far stronger than Song Yuhan? She fiddled with the hairpins in her hair, grinning arrogantly. She had stayed in the northern border marquis residence for almost half a month, but the lady didn't allow her to leave the room, and Yun Jingshua never came to see her. She thought of countless ways to win his heart, but there was simply no opportunity to put any of them into action. One night, she secretly snuck into Yun Jingshua's bedroom. On the desk, she found a letter torn in half. She read it. It was about an imperial marriage between Song Yuhan and Shen Maxin. Chung Yuzhu smiled to herself. She thought this was the perfect opportunity to win Yun Jingshua's heart. Even if she had to be Shen Maxin's substitute, so long as she secured wealth, power, and safety, that was all that mattered. The night was dark, and there were no candles in the room. Chung Yuzhu was admiring Yun Jingshua's plain bedroom when she suddenly saw him leaning in the doorway, his gaze coldly fixed on her. She quickly calmed herself and carefully approached him, tugging at his sleeve. "Young master, you've left me locked up in the room. I can't stay here any longer. I feel suffocated." His dark eyes fixed on her, void of any warmth. After a while, he raised his hand, gripping her chin and forcing her to look up at him. "You resemble her too much. This is not good. It should be the opposite." Chung Yuzhu didn't understand, but didn't dare to ask. Then Yun Jingshua released her chin. "But sneaking into a strange man's bedroom, that's good. From now on, you're not allowed to wear white. Wear the most flashy, delicate clothes possible, and your hairpins and accessories should be as extravagant as they can get." As he spoke, he walked to the desk, carefully pieced together the torn letter, and stored it away. Chung Yuzhu couldn't figure out what he was thinking, but she didn't believe that with her face, Yun Jingshua wouldn't feel anything for her. So, she threw herself into his arms, hugging him tightly. "It was you who saved me, young master. I'm willing to do whatever you want." Yun Jingshua didn't push her away. but after a while, he gripped her wrist tightly, the pressure so intense it felt like he could crush her bones. Chung Yuju screamed in pain, begging for mercy. Yun Jingshua's face remained emotionless, and he looked down at her from above. "If you ever dare again, I'll throw you into the slums." He smiled as he spoke, his lips curling into a faint grin. "You won't be hurt physically, but who knows what will happen on the inside." Yun Jingshua threw her aside and climbed onto the bed. Chung Yuju sat on the floor, drenched in cold sweat despite it being the height of summer. Her nightmare had just begun. Yun Jingshua treated her well, feeding her and taking care of her for several years. One winter, she was sent to Lini by carriage, but along the way, they were attacked by bandits. Her guards and maids were killed, and she was thrown off the carriage, rolling down a hillside and landing in a thicket, narrowly escaping death. When she woke up, she saw Song Yuhan. His gaze was gentle, holding a bowl of hot soup in front of her. Aside from looking at her as though she were someone else, he was perfect in every way. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she couldn't help but cry. Song Yuhan's kindness and gentleness were in stark contrast to Yun Jingshua. In her heart, she felt a strange sense of relief that she had encountered bandits, fallen into trouble, and then met Song Yuhan. Perhaps this was fate. At first, Song Yuhan gazed at her in a daze. When Meng Yuju noticed, she sneered and mocked him, cursing him, even acting out in a violent and madwoman-like manner. The white dress Song Yuhan gave her was burned to ashes by her. She wore only the most expensive, the most extravagant, and ate the most luxurious food. Over time, Song Yuhan's gaze towards her changed. She knew now that in his heart, there was only her, only Meng Yuju. 3 years was enough. When she saw Shin Maxin, her pride swelled upon seeing her graceful, noble face, despite the faint anger in her expression. Now it was Shin Maxin who didn't resemble Meng Yuju. She knew how to manipulate Song Yuhan perfectly, deliberately throwing tantrums, clinging to him, and pulling him into the palace. She even pretended to fall into the water and, in a moment of weakness, followed Shin Maxin's suggestion to run into a pillar. Song Yuhan was firmly in her grasp, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. Until she saw Yun Jingshua again. At the banquet, he sat beside Shin Maxin, and his gaze toward her was still as cold and sharp as ever. She started to tremble, questioning whether she was still under his control. The first day Yun Jingshua returned to the marquis residence, she ran to the door and began banging on it. Yun Jingshua's people recognized her and allowed her inside with ease. The moment she stepped in, she kneeled on the ground, lowering herself, and apologized profusely to Yun Jingshua. He merely rested his head on his hand, chuckling lightly, as though she were of no importance to him. She had never seen Yun Jingshua with such a sincere, carefree smile before. It was as if he was genuinely happy. The dark seed of bitterness was planted within her. When she returned to the royal residence, she was caught by Song Yuhan. She didn't explain herself, and the two of them, like strangers, carried their own secrets. Before long, Song Yuhan was beaten by Yun Jingshua. Meng Yuju sat by his bed, feeding him porridge just as he once had done for her. He couldn't swallow a single bite and was even more irritable than before. In a frenzy, Meng Yuju threw the bowl to the ground, screaming, "Why? Why do you all like her so much?" Yun Jingshua and Song Yuhan's reactions pushed Meng Yuju over the edge. She secretly incited Song Yuhan, promising to keep Yun Jingshua at bay. But she couldn't match Yun Jingshua's power. When she was scolded by the queen and others, she didn't even see Yun Jingshua turn around. Eventually, she began to wonder why Shin Maxin had suddenly become so sharp-witted. Was she like Meng Yuju? Meng Yuju harbored suspicions and eventually asked Shin Maxin. Her reaction alleviated her worries. She still had the upper hand. After a long time, Yun Jingshua came to find her again. This time, Meng Yuju gave up her luxurious attire, wearing the white dress Yun Jingshua had forbidden her to wear and the simple hairpin he had told her to avoid. When Yun Jingshua saw her, he only sneered, but this time, he was here to silence her. He told her that he would prepare a dowry for her, and all she had to do was hold onto Song Yuhan tightly. She didn't need to worry about anything else. Meng Yuzhu didn't believe him, but she had no choice but to accept. On the day of her wedding, the royal residence was raided, and 12 full chests of military weapons were found. Song Yuhan no longer had any chance of recovery. In the chaos, she escaped the royal residence and hid behind the back wall of the northern border marquis residence. Yun Jingshua, dressed in ceremonial attire, walked toward her from a distance. Although both were dressed in wedding clothes, their circumstances couldn't have been more different. Yun Jingshua, your methods are so clever, she muttered. Yun Jingshua didn't respond. He tilted his head slightly, as though appraising her. After a while, he squatted in front of her, his gaze scanning her face with a smile. You don't resemble her anymore. Not at all. Meng Yuzhu laughed and cried at the same time. Yun Jingshua, why are you doing this to me? She screamed like a madwoman. Yun Jingshua grabbed her throat, the suffocating sensation taking over. His eyes grew colder, as though recalling something unpleasant, and his grip tightened. Don't think I don't know. You faked her death and caused her to suffer. You made her endure everything, he said coldly, his strength increasing as he spoke. He sneered, the person I cherished in the palm of my hand, yet you and Song Yuhan, tortured and humiliated her. Meng Yuzhu no longer had the strength to struggle, but just before she lost consciousness, Yun Jingshua released her. He clapped his hands. Meng Yuzhu, I know you're not simple. But so what? Song Yuhan is about to die, and you can only wait for your own death. I'm a man who holds grudges. With that, he turned and walked away. In the moonlit night, he smiled at the full moon before entering the marquis residence, to see the woman he had gone through so much trouble to marry, the woman he had finally brought home after so many twists and turns. The end.